Well, a couple of days ago, ANC Secretary General Gwede Mantashe expressing serious grievances. He's concerned about BEE, Black Economic Empowerment, focusing on what he calls shareholding rather than helping beneficiaries gain a deeper understanding of the business. He's also warned BEE companies to stop using the state as their cash cow by providing poor quality goods at inflated prices. Mr. Mantashe joins me here on the Forum at 8 this morning. A very good morning to you, sir. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Pepet.
And thanks indeed for coming through. Firstly, let's start with your concerns about BEE. What are you worried about?
No, let me start by putting into perspective what that meeting was.
Yeah.
We're engaging about 120 intellectuals. I'm using that term guardedly to say to them, help the country think. Every country depends on its intellectuals to think issues through. But if intellectuals are laid back, basically, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we're doing trial and error and burn our fingers before we can get scientifically researched and theorized policies. So that was the appeal we're making to them. But the question of the BE emerged because among the people who came to the meeting was a representation of the Black Business Council, which raised issues about BE. We emphasized the point that BEE is quite an important policy in terms of deracializing the economy and ownership. But we said, but it should not be an issue like Father Christmas dishing out money to black owners because they are black and therefore want to deracialize the economy. There must be seriousness about black companies getting shareholding but be operational. And because when you're operational, you understand the business, you understand the sector. Therefore, you are increasing the capacity of the country to run the economy. But if your relationship with a company where you are holding shares are dividends, you basically get the money and you don't know nothing about the company. And that is the concern that we're raising. The second thing that we raise is the concern that government must buy a bottle of water for 27 rand when you can get it over the counter for 7 rand, because we want to create a layer of businesses that must be beneficiary from government. We say that is equal to making the primary objective secondary and take a secondary objective and make it primary, in the sense that if the primary objective, for example, is to deliver a meal a day at school for a poor child, that is the primary objective. That must be done properly, good food once a day. It cannot be relegated into being secondary because we want to create wealth for a black company that delivers bread on Monday for the whole week, and kids eat that bread on Friday when it is stale. It can't be correct because you are now elevating the Black Economic Empowerment to be primary over the primary objective of delivering a meal a day to a poor child.
Right. Another email came through from Paul Benjamin Mudimeli, who says, I want to know what are they doing to fight corruption when it comes to those tenders, and why government is not cancelling and bringing back public works fully, because they can hire skilled workers and professional workers instead of taking our tax money and giving it to criminals. Imagine the government is buying a loaf of bread which is 10 rand, but because of tenders they have to buy it for 20 rand, double the amount. Why they can't do a project in communities and fund them to open communities? That's an email from Paul. Just have a quick response before I go to Prophet OJ, Zamo in Randburg, Billy in Edendale, Daddy in Soweto. They are waiting on the line, Mr. Mantashe.
Yes, let me finish the first question quickly by saying that it would help as well to conduct our office when there is a skilled worker who is marginalized and not appointed and a less skilled worker is appointed. There are few cases that we have dealt with like that. One example would be a municipal manager in a municipality in the Eastern Cape, I won't mention the name, who was number one by far. But people try to say, we're not appointing, we're appointing number two, who was far inferiorly qualified than that first one. That manager came to our office and said, I'm taking that municipality to court, don't complain. And we said to him, take that municipality to court, because when you do so, you are teaching that municipality, you are also teaching ANC political leaders in that area that you can't appoint people because it's job for pals. And when that municipal manager won that case, he came back and said, thank you. And he is the municipal manager of that municipality today. And that is what we want. We want people to actually alert us to these things rather than complaining in corners. Tell us that they have appointed a wrong person, but there is an appropriate qualified person in that qualification. When a province says to me that municipal manager meets the requirements, I ask the question, what are the requirements that are met? And sometimes we find them wanting, and we are going to be more consistent in doing so because it is not about us, it is about the country. Now let me go to the SMSs. A manufacturer who is marginalized because it doesn't support the ANC, I don't know how can the ANC marginalize a manufacturer, not unless he manufactures T-shirts and he wants to sell them to the ANC. Because if you are a manufacturer, you manufacture goods, units of goods that you sell to society. The ANC cannot interfere with the market, and therefore that is the issue. But if you are selling T-shirts to the ANC and therefore you are marginalized, that's a different matter. If you say I don't support the ANC but I want to sell T-shirts to them, you are being very much ambitious, really, because if you are a manufacturer, sell units that are needed by the economy, by people, and you sell them. And then the IDC funding is a debate that we're having in the ANC. That's why we have set a new committee now called SOEs and Development Finance Institutions. Because our argument from a political point of view is that development finance institutions should be more risk. They must have more risk appetite. They can't be as risk averse as private banks because they are not development finance institutions if they are like other financial institutions. And what they're having that debate, the IDC, the DBSA, National Housing Finance Corporation, Land Bank must be able to actually fund projects because they have a development potential. So in that situation, you don't need to have all the securities and all those things. We don't think they should totally close their eyes to risk.
That's the problem, because they will not be able to throw their money in an open pit.
No. Let me give you an example. I worked for the DBSA before I came to the ANC for 18 months. One of the projects we started was a partnership with Unilever where we said, let's plant paprika in Kiskamauk. And that paprika had a captured market in terms of Unilever. And that project generated 2 million in that village in the first year. I'm told now the BSA has stopped funding that project. I think it is wrong for a development institution to stop funding a project that has a huge developmental impact instead of actually upgrading it and then pull out when it can run on its own. Because development institution must develop the market and appreciate the fact that once that market is ripe, the private sector will come and actually hound them out of that market. Development finance institutions must accept that as a reality that they must confront. What do we do to fight corruption? I'm one person who always make a simple statement about corruption. I know that there is a lot of noise about corruption, and I say there's only one formula that I learned when I visited an area that was famous for crime and corruption in England, that there's only one deterrent to corruption is the rate of arrest, prosecution, and conviction.
At a high level.
At all levels. At all levels. Corruption must be dealt with at highest level, at lowest level, at all levels. Arrest, prosecute, and convict. If we don't succeed there, we can talk and talk and talk. Corruption will not be, there will be no deterrent.
All right. I thank you very much. Let me get responses then. We've got 5 minutes to respond. In fact, less than that, Mr. Mantashe.
Yes. Professor OJ raises whether there's a fair calculation of living wage. Actually, it's not the WTO or UN, it is the ILO that has given a more scientific definition of decent work. Yeah. So the decent work gives you the basic thing that should be covered by a wage. But I can tell you that trade unions are about exceeding basic standard. So that's why I said earlier, Kolani, the question of what comes out of bargaining is a function of the competence of management and leadership on both sides. Because if the management team is weak, they will give in to huge increases. If it is strong, or the leadership of the union is weak, it will accept very low increases. That's why sometimes there are options. You can have increases decreed by government. There are systems that work that way. But I can tell you in South Africa, they will all be suspicious of that.
Okay.
But when they are actually getting huge increases, they come back and blame the government. We can't live in this. Why is this government? And therefore, it's a no-win situation for the government. The second point by OJ was the second phase. I can just say the discussion in the policy conference that came to decision that we can't say is the second transition. We can say is the second phase of the transition. Was not a compromise. It was a decision out of a very high-level discussion by delegates who came to the conclusion that we're in the same transition from apartheid colonialism to this national democratic state. And
Right.
therefore that phase, the second phase, therefore is emphasizing stepping out socio-economic issues.
Zamo says,
Now, Zamo asked me a simple question. Was this thing of tenders discussed in the policy conference? It was discussed in the policy conference. It was discussed in the NEC Lekgotla as well. That, listen, this thing of having a tender state is not working. Let's build the state systematically and reduce over-dependence on state. It was debated in policy conference.
sure, Billy is talking about land.
On the land and rural areas, land is a major issue for the ANC now. There is a particular trigger to that debate to be reignited, is the fact that 2013 will be the centenary of the 1913 Native Land Act. And that debate is going to be hot next year, I can tell you now. If people are in denial, they don't know what is waiting for them. That's why the first thing that we talk about are land tenure systems, where we talked about four of them. One, state and public land, where we said that can be sold. Secondly, is the privately owned land and freehold with limited extent.